Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Barbour webinar on the 5 key steps to conducting a successful incident investigation. I'm Teresa Higgins. I'm the brand manager for Barbour EHS, and for today's agenda, Sharon Haynes is going to give you a brief overview of Barbour. Then we're going to have presentations from Stephen Reeve and Steve Vardy from ARMS Reliability. Now, they ran a very successful webinar last year on root cause analysis. I'm sure you'll all remember. So for your questions and answers, please submit any questions via a chat box throughout this presentation, and we will answer them as many as we can. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. Your CPD certificate and other slides will be emailed to you after the presentation. And for any technical issues, there will now be a box on your screen. Please report them, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can to help you through. So, again, I'm Teresa Higgins. As I say, Stephen Reeves and Steve Vardy will be taking us through from ARMS Reliability. And now I'd like to hand you over to Sharon Haynes, Customer Care Manager, to talk you through a little bit about Barbour. Thank you so much.
Morning, everyone. This is just to introduce you very briefly to the Barbour service. Some of you may be using us, some of you may be thinking about it. Barbour EHS is an information service and a working tool, and it's designed to support you in compliance, communication, and to encourage good safety culture across the business. By having all of the topics, publishers and documents at your fingertips when you need them, it's designed to save you time and money. With a bookmarking feature and legal register tool, we'll keep you updated on documents and information that really matter to your business. Barbour EHS has modules to suit everyone from health, safety, facilities and environment, so you can build the perfect service for your organisation's requirements. We're also very proud to offer our ever-growing international legislation module, which now has over 18 countries. Our additional supplement modules like fire, food safety, chemicals, trading standards ensure you get the specialist information that you need. And we're very proud to say we're also launching a new mental health and wellbeing module on the 17th of May. And to complete the Barbour package, we also have an e-learning service in partnership with Praxis 42 to help with all training and health and safety, with all courses being IOSH approved. Whether you're bookmarking documents that are useful or building and managing your legal register, Barbour will help to keep you up to date with email alerts so you know exactly what's changing, and we'll even send the new documents automatically to your folders so you won't have to spend time looking for amendments. The resources that Barbour offer enable fast, easy communication with directors, senior managers and staff. With directors' briefings, employee fact sheets and PowerPoint presentations, you can put together relevant information in easy-to-understand formats. Summaries are also provided wherever possible to save you reading time, and Gap Analysis tool will help you obtain and maintain your ISO accreditations. And don't worry, we will be ready for 45001. To complete the portfolio, we also have the Safety and Health Expo at Excel every year, which offers insight and innovation for all EHS and FM professionals. We have SHP Online, which is the leading health and safety news site and has been running for over 30 years. SHP for Jobs will give you access to the best candidates in health, safety and environment and supports your recruitment. And we're having a conference on the 17th of May at our London office to launch our mental health and wellbeing module. Do come and see us at the Expo on our stand, and if you want any information about the conference, about the Expo or Barbour, please go to our website, barbour-ehs.com, or just give us a call. So now I'd like to pass you over to Stephen Reed, who is the EMEA General Manager at ARMS Reliability. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you can see the transition to the next slide. ARMS Reliability, we're going to be talking today about the 5 key steps for incident investigation. What we see as an organisation going around various companies is not having the solid foundation needed to conduct an effective investigation. So today we're going to be walking you through what those key steps are, the things that will have you best placed to set up a successful investigation before you move into the root cause analysis phase of the work that you're doing. So as we mentioned, if you don't have adequately trained and prepared teams, which brings me to one of the questions I think somebody had already asked in advance of the webinar around the level of qualification people need to be on an incident investigation team. We don't necessarily see that there's a need for people to be qualified. Sometimes, depending on your industry, that can be the case. However, as long as people are trained, prepared, and there are consistent processes through an organization, then that tends to be appropriate for the investigations that need to be led following any incident that needs to be looked into. Making sure you have all of the correct steps followed will make sure that any outcomes of any investigation are cost effective. They need to be easy to implement and sustainable, and we need to make sure that any solutions that we come up with that we find as part of the root cause analysis will indeed prevent recurrence of that incident or issue happening again. So what we're going to work through today is understanding these 5 key steps of incident investigation. So it'll be Steve Vardy and myself that will walk through that with you today, just to introduce us a little bit more. So as introduced, I'm Stephen Reeve. I'm the General Manager for the Europe, Middle East, Africa region for Arms Reliability. Arms Reliability undertakes various training services, internal or public trainings. We also offer facilitation services if there are incidents or issues where you need a third-party independent company to come in and assist with any investigations, and we have a number of technical trainings and consulting services as well. Steve is one of our senior reliability engineers who's also experienced in training on root cause analysis methodologies and has also supported a number of facilitations in the past. So the 10 stages of prevention that we mentioned that we're talking about the top 5. So last year when we undertook the webinar previously here, which was very successful, we're very grateful to be doing another one this year. So we looked at the latter part of that list in terms of once we had all of the evidence and information that was required, we would go into determining the root causes of any incidents. We talked about root cause analysis methodology, implementation of solutions, and how to track effectiveness and such. Today we're going to step back to look at Today we're going to look back at the first 5 steps that you need to follow to make sure that you have sufficient evidence and information when going into that investigation process. So finally from me, this is the summary of what we're going to be going through today. So the importance of that investigation, why we do investigations, what those 5 key steps are. We'll have a summary and then we'll go into a Q&A session. Any questions that come up, please type them into the system. If we don't get to them today, we'll certainly address those and be in touch with you after the webinar. I'll now hand over to Steve Vardy and he can walk through some of the content of the webinar. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. Okay, so I'm going to take you through in a little bit more detail to look at the 5 key steps that we should try and undertake before we start to do our actual RCA analysis. So the first section, the importance of the incident investigation. First of all, I'd like to talk a little bit about how incidents occur, just using this Swiss cheese model that I'm sure a lot of you have seen before. This particular model on the diagram on the screen shows that we have a hazardous act or a hazard of some kind that's indicated by the red line, and some layers of defence which are indicated by the Swiss cheese models. Now, if we have gaps in our layers of defence indicated by the holes in those pieces of Swiss cheese, and then those gaps begin to line up, then our hazard can result in a loss of some kind, and that could be a safety incident, that could be a loss of production, it could be any type of incident. Okay, so when we get failures and those fault conditions do line up, then we can get some catastrophic results. So that's just to indicate what's happening. Just moving on to the next slide. The hazard in a lot of cases is resulting from a human act. Not in every case, but certainly a lot of time people make mistakes, and if our layers of defence don't stand up, then we can get the resulting failure. Typical types of incidents that we see include threats to people and threats to the business or the enterprise as well. And there's many different types of these types of incidents that can result in illnesses, injuries, exposures to hazardous substances, etc. So threats in terms of safety, and this can include near misses as well. So we can have an incident that is not resulting in an injury or a loss, but very close to. And near misses are something that a lot of people tend to be reluctant in reporting, so we tend to lose out on the evidence gathering for them. But it's important that we learn from near misses and try and follow the same process and gather as much information as we can before we conduct an RCA. There's also threats to the enterprise, and these are threats that include negative publicity, violations of regulations, and losses of production and profitability, of course. So there's lots of different types of incidents that we see in different organisations around the world. Just moving on to the next slide. The purpose of doing investigations. So why is it that we do investigations? Why do we investigate incidents? Hopefully to learn what went wrong, so we can prevent repeat occurrences of the problem, whatever it was. And how do we go about doing these investigations? Well, we need to identify what happened first, identify the root causes of the incidents, and identify any solutions that we can to put in place to prevent recurrence. So that's generally the process that we would go about following. And there are many different types of RCA processes out there. 5 Whys, Apollo, Fishbone. There's all sorts of different methods that we can use. But what's imperative is that we have the evidence and data gathering up front before we sit down and discuss in an RCA environment. So this section is really important. The next section is about the 5 key steps and the things that we need to try and get done to try and make sure we have a successful investigation. The first one being the securing of the incident scene. Now, if we take a safety incident, for instance, we might need to secure the scene. Obviously, there'll be an initial person that's on the scene, an initial person in charge, as we will call them, and they would be responsible for managing the scene when straight after the incident's occurred. It's important that this person knows what to do to make sure that the scene is secured, and try to identify and preserve any potential evidence. It may be that we need to control access to that particular scene in order to help us preserve the evidence, and we may start to document the scene using some templates that we may have. And have just to think, do you have these kinds of templates within your organisation already, ready to go in the event of an incident? So this initial person in charge is obviously, safety is paramount, so securing the scene is very important, but not to lose sight of production goals, etc. We may need to be sure that we can continue operating if needs be, but safety would be of paramount importance. Just have a think about who would fill this kind of role in your situation. What kind of level of your organisation would people ideally be at to be the initial person in charge? So that's securing the scene. Then we need to go on to selecting the team members that we need to carry out our investigation. So the investigation team members, depending on the type of the incident, some people in different organisations have different attributes to others. So they don't need to ideally be subject matter experts to be effective at investigating, but there are some traits that help and some others that do not. So some of the desirable traits are people that are very thorough, have a questioning attitude, can be very respectful, good listeners. They need to be proficient in your RCA processes, whichever methods it is that you use. So these kind of desirable traits that we look for in individuals that are members of our investigation team. And then on the flip side, there's some traits that we try to avoid, some pitfalls. People that have a bit of a blame mentality can cause problems in your investigation process. People that have preformed opinions and can be very defensive. People that also jump to conclusions and shortcut the analysis can cause you problems and lead you to be ineffective at problem solving. So those kind of things we look for to include and not to include in personalities, if you like.
Just one thing, Steve. I think while there's a lot of great information you're showing here, just to let everybody know, we will be distributing the slides. You'll get a copy of the slide deck, so you don't need to take comprehensive notes as we're going through. You can concentrate on the content we're going through, and we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy of the webinar afterwards. Just wanted to mention that in case people were furiously scribbling notes.
Okay, no problem. So selecting the investigation team, there are a number of roles that we need to make sure that are filled, and these don't need to be roles for individuals, so you don't need a specific individual for each of these roles, or maybe you do. It depends on the organisation and the actual nature of the incident. So you could have one person that fulfills all of these roles, or one person for each of these roles, or anywhere in between. Okay, so if we just have a look at some of these different roles that we're talking about, your incident investigation leader, that will be the person that would be assigning the roles to the team members. They will be responsible for running the investigation. You will need an evidence gatherer coordinator, so somebody that would initiate the collection effort to gather as much evidence as possible, because evidence is critical really to the successful of your investigation, and certainly in being able to develop effective solutions to prevent recurrence. We need to make sure we're identifying causes that are based on evidence. So this is quite a key role, the evidence coordinator. We also need to think about the preservation of this evidence. Depending on the type of the incident, you may need another person that can make sure that the evidence is preserved in a good state, and that it doesn't get deteriorated in any way. That could be the same person, or certainly it could be another member of your team. Communications coordinator, usually from a major event perspective on a corporate level, you may need somebody to communicate with any external parties. So there could be media interest or public interest in an incident that you may have had on your site, and you'll need to appoint somebody to be able to handle that kind of communication. So they're responsible for dealing with those questions, etc. And the interview coordinator. So you may need somebody that can coordinate and manage the interviewing process, because one of the key sources of information and evidence from an incident would be witnesses, that people that were there and saw the incident, or people that are aware of what happened. You may want to start your interview process quite quickly, if possible. So.
And Steve, I guess just one quick question. I know that maybe it'd come in and I had the team that you have available, that can be specific to the size and scale of an incident, I guess, from your experience. If it's a smaller incident issue you're investigating, it can be one person, but I guess the more severe the issue, then we'd look to probably have different people fill some of those roles if it was quite a comprehensive investigation that needed to be undertaken.
Certainly, yes. The more complex the incident and the bigger the impact from the incident, obviously the more effort will go into the root cause analysis to try and prevent recurrence of that. So yeah, definitely you will depending on the impact of the actual incident, then you'll assign the correct size of team to deal with that, depending on the effort and the resources available. Leading on to investigation team size is more better. Well, we've just said really. Not in every case. It depends on the impact and the size of the incident and the complexity. You could have lots and lots of evidence that needs collecting, and And usually evidence drives the need for people. So you generally find you could have lots and lots of random information that will be collected as evidence in the initial stages. It's important to note that it doesn't really matter about the random nature of this information in the first instance. Just get the facts gathered and put them together. They can be assessed and categorized later on during the investigation. So the need for evidence gathering, the need for doing interviews, so depending on how many witnesses there are that need interviewing, and the analysis of the actual information that comes out of these initial stages. That will be the driver for the number of people required to help you in your investigation. Just clicking on to the next. Optimum team size would be 1 to 4 people, but as I said, it may require more members if it's a more complex problem. Low impact problems would require fewer team members, as we've already stated, and the deciding factor is the need for knowledge and analysis of the information. So selecting the correct team to help you through. Just bear in mind, the larger the team becomes, it gets exponentially harder to manage. I think statistics show if you get any one person more than 7 in a group, becomes less effective at making decisions by 10%. So the point at which you reach 17 people, you basically make no decisions whatsoever. So it becomes harder to manage the more people you have in the room. So bear that one in mind. So planning the investigation, we've got the scene secured. We've selected our team. Now we need to plan what it is the team are going to conduct. So let's have a look at a few points to discuss there. So the moment an incident occurs, the initial person in charge, or the IPIC, preserves and protects life. So remember, safety first. There may be injuries involved where we need to arrange for medical treatment, people to go to hospital, etc. Stabilising, containing and securing the scene, preserving the evidence. That's the first thing that we need to do as soon as an incident has occurred. As soon as possible. It may be a remote location and it may take some time to get there, but certainly we need to secure the scene. Then the investigation lead will go on to prepare an investigation plan and select the correct team to carry out that plan. Collect the facts supported by the evidence, document the scenes, take photographs, videos, is there any CCTV in the area that could help, take notes and maybe sketches, identify any witnesses that were at the scene of the incident or stood nearby, make a note of their locations as well, interview and collect witness observations and statements from them. So arrange for those interviews to take place and collect information as soon as possible from them. Then move on to try and develop an incident timeline. An incident timeline can help you in the investigation process because it gives you a good starting point when you start doing your RCA. We'll talk about that a little bit more a little bit later. So you receive the initial call, you need to prepare to plan the investigation. So it's important that we're in a good state of readiness. So you need to get the preliminary what, the when, the where and the significance of the incident from the initial person in charge. So that's just the initial information, what's happened, when did it happen, where did it happen, and how important is it to us. You know, how big is this impact on our business or on safety. Determine the status of the incident. So, is it still underway? There could be further knock-on effects, so it could escalate over time, or is it a one-off incident that's now ended and we're now in the state of preservation? So, determine what the status is, and then look to understand any sensitivities that may be around. There could be some injuries. There could be people that have been involved where there could be disciplinary action coming into play. So it's important to understand what those sensitivities might be. If necessary and appropriate, you may need to request to isolate the area, so you may want to use some barrier tape. to isolate the actual place where the incident occurred. But again, remember that this needs to be balanced with the need to return to normal production or operation, whatever type of industry it is that you work in. And it may be that you need to escalate any notifications as appropriate. There could be a requirement under law to report a particular incident of a particular type. So remember to use the escalation process where relevant. These are all the things that you need to be ready really to carry out in the event of at any point in time, 24/7. So planning the investigation, prepare a preliminary briefing for your team members. So the lead would prepare this and deliver it to the investigating team that's been selected. Use that initial information that's been gathered from the initial person in charge and provide a description and include the significance of what that incident is to the organisation. Speak about normal operating conditions and the need to return to normal operating conditions and any coordination protocols that are required with other departments. So that everybody on site that's working in that area is aware of the need for evidence gathering, the need to return to normal operating conditions, etc., and the importance of what it is that you're doing and investigating.
I think just to mention here, Stephen again, is that I think the examples we're giving are around a more significant event or incident that's occurred. We're giving that as an example to talk about some of the depths of investigation you may need to go into. The 5 steps are scalable. I think it can be just as applicable to a smaller incident investigation or to a near miss, for example. I know some questions had come in as to whether we would investigate near misses, which we think we would, depending on the potential impact that near miss would have had it have not been a miss. So obviously we're showing something more meaningful here. I think it was just important to mention that, as I say, it's a scalable approach that can be applied to a smaller issue as well.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So the next step to follow will be to collect the facts supported by evidence, which is something we've already thought about in preparing for our investigation, but we need to be ready as soon as an incident occurs. So we need to be prepared to lead or participate in an investigation at all times. And that's very important to us because incidents tend to happen at times when you're not expecting it. You wouldn't expect an incident to occur, so it can be at any point in your daily operations. And if you operate a 24-hour operation, then it could happen right in the middle of the night when you least expect it. So we need to be prepared to conduct an investigation and have a team ready. So you may have to think about shift patterns and how people are operating the equipment and the particular site that you run or the facility that you work in, and make sure that you've got a good set of people that understand the need for effective investigation all times during your normal operations. So it assures then we have a systematic professional response, and the evidence gathering can start straight away before things begin to change. This helps to reduce confusion and improves the timeliness, so you can get your RCA underway as soon as possible to prevent recurrence of whatever the problem is. It helps you to ensure that you have a thorough investigation by doing it in this way. One of the things that may help you, certainly I've come across this in the past. You don't have to be a subject matter expert, but if you've got a go bag of some possible, some items that you might be able to use in the initial stages of securing the scene, etc., it's useful to have one of these. I used to work for a company where it was a top-tier coma facility, so serious incidents would require a certain level of response. And we had a go bag of items ready to go in the event of any type of incident. So this bag or hold all of some sort would include lots of different things that you could include things like barrier tape, as we already mentioned, to secure the scene, fluorescent spray, flashing lights, traffic cones. There could be danger, out of service tags, those kind of things. So things that are going to help you in the initial stages of your evidence gathering. And there's many different things depending on the type of organisation that you work for, obviously. digital cameras with spare batteries, etc., would be very useful in terms of collecting evidence straight away, so you can take photographs of different things. Accident report forms, having the templates available, ready to start taking observation statements from witnesses, those kinds of things. And like I said, there's many different things you could have included in this go bag. Of particular importance to note is have this bag checked on a regular basis. So if there is a packet of batteries and a digital camera and a torch and a tape measure laying around in a bag, somebody may decide at some point they might want to borrow it. So it might be useful just to have a planned maintenance routine, just to periodically check the contents of the bag, make sure it's not been tampered with, etc., so you are ready to respond in the event of anything.
I think the other important thing to mention there, Steve, and we've touched on this before, is around having your disaster recovery or business continuity procedures, that if it's a significant event that affects your particular site, which is where that go bag, grab bag is held, you may not have immediate access to that. So to have another bag as a backup in another location is always potentially a good idea.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so inspecting the incident scene, fact and evidence gathering is important as soon as possible, because we know that things can change quite rapidly. We need to understand any actions and conditions that may have occurred during the incident. Now, this will have been talked about in last year's webinar. Actions, for those that saw that webinar, remember, are normally momentary things. A lot of the time, the things that people do and the conditions that existed at the time that action was performed. If you think back to the Swiss cheese slide earlier, the conditions tend to be the gaps in our lines of defence. And the actions are the hazardous act, usually performed by an individual. So we need to identify those directly or indirectly involved and any witnesses for interviewing purposes. It can help to inspect machinery, equipment, vehicles, etc. if there's any been involved in the incident, take photographs and document as much evidence as possible. So this is important right after the incident has happened. So as soon as possible, start to take photographs, make drawings and sketches, and review any relevant documentation that could be involved, like in procedural information, driver logs if it's a vehicle incident, those kind of things. So have all these sorts of things in mind when you're ready to start inspecting the scene. So create a drawing of the incident site, and you may even ask witnesses to sketch what it is that they recall from the incident as well. So start to build a picture of the reality when the incident occurred. So positions of equipment, machinery, components, vehicles, etc. Positions of injured parties and witnesses, and measure any important distances that you feel are relevant. It may be relevant that you want to note the weather conditions. There could be it could have been particularly icy or foggy or hot. There could be lots of different factors, and these are the conditions that exist, remember. So somebody's come along, maybe made a mistake, but usually they've been set up to fail in some way by the conditions that existed at the time that they made that particular mistake. So remember to make notes of any environmental conditions and things that may look out of place at the time. Remember, you could have the interviewees draw diagrams of what they saw at the time as well. So, moving on to evidence, it's important that when we undertake our root cause analysis, that we support all of the causes that we generate on our root cause analysis with some form of evidence, because we don't want to be looking to try and solve causes that are not based on evidence. We could be then throwing money at things that are not factual and didn't really happen. So it's important that we collect the evidence right at the beginning to support our root cause analysis process. So what is evidence? Well, it's the available body or facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. So really, it's any information that supports a conclusion. That's what evidence is. And it is very important to us in carrying out our investigation. It supports the it validates our findings during our RCA and improves the likelihood that our solutions are going to prevent recurrence of the incident. So it's vitally important, if we're going to get a successful outcome, that we have evidence to back up our statements. And you usually find evidence in 4 different types. So categorizing them, you have sensed evidence, so that's evidence that's been directly perceived by an individual, very good quality evidence usually. Inferred evidence is the second sort of type of evidence that's usually good quality. So things like instrumentation readouts in control rooms are giving you an inference of a certain incident or a certain piece of information. So we use inferred evidence quite a lot because we know of the repeatable cause and effect relationships that lead from the detection end to the actual readout of the instrument, if you like. But it's important that we can confirm, if we're talking about an instrumentation type of loop, then we confirm that that particular instrument is working correctly before we accept that kind of evidence. There are other types of evidence that are a little less rock solid, if you like. Intuition is one of them, where we start to have feelings and sort of gut feelings coming into play. But again, it's evidence, if it's all you've got, then it's important that we use it and try and uncover something more substantial. And the 4th type is generally emotional evidence, and a lot of this can be fantasy. So it can be completely not true, and emotional reactions to particular scenarios can lead us down the wrong path. But again, if it's all that you have, try and use it. Certainly don't ignore it. Try and use it to uncover something more substantial. So those are the 4 sort of categories of evidence, but we just have to be careful, certainly with sensed evidence. We'll have witnesses that sensed things, that saw things, that heard things, and sometimes that sensed evidence can be a little unreliable. Different people will see different things. It's not physiologically possible for 2 people to hold the same perception of an event. So there will be different things that different people will see. And the longer you leave it before you start to interview witnesses, the more chance you've got of the actual person's mind filling in the gaps. And this could be positive or negative. If you've got an individual that's very positive about the job and the organisation that they work for, then they may be biased towards filling in the gaps with positive information. And opposite to that, if you're somebody that's a little bit low in morale and they're not happy with their shift pattern or they're not very positive about the job that they're in, then they may fill in the gaps with more negative information. So you have to watch out for that. There could be hidden agendas involved in there. It often lacks detail as well, so it focuses on the actions. Witnesses tend to focus on things that happened at specific points in time that may look out of place. Tend to not focus on the conditions around that kind of area at the time. They're more concerned with the acts of individuals and things that happened out of place. So watch out for that. You'll find lots of action causes from witness statements and very few conditional causes. So remember that sensed evidence is usually the best kind, one of the best kinds of evidence, but the sensed evidence, if we can back it up with some form of inferred evidence, then that's really good quality. Or you may have 2 different witnesses that can corroborate each other with the same evidence that they're providing, which again makes it more substantial in terms of its quality. So the quality ladder for evidence, really the facts corroborated with evidence, that's the best stuff that you can look for. When we get into inference, then sometimes assumptions and beliefs and opinions come into play. It's often based on prior experience, gut feelings, etc. And then the lower down the ladder you go, hearsay, guesses and fantasy. That's really not acceptable as evidence. But again, remember that you need to not ignore it and make sure if it's all you've got that you use it to try and uncover something more substantial. So when you've gathered all this random information, all of this evidence at the beginning, your team of investigators need to then sort it out into the relevant sections on the quality ladder. So determine the best evidence that you can find within the information that you've gathered. A few examples here. So recorded measurements are usually very reliable. Again, this is like inferred evidence. So things like instrument readouts, etc., measurements that have been taken at the scene, lab test results, those kind of things, usually very reliable with a little bit of confirmation of calibration checks, etc., to make sure things are working correctly. Expert opinions tend to be things that you can trust but will need some form of verification, so back it up with something else. Definitely valuable information, but can come with bias, so you have to watch out for that. Again, personal observations can be trusted, so witness statements, but again, try and verify them or corroborate them with something else from another witness or some inferred evidence if you have it to hand. Remember, people do see different things. And then emotions, intuition and feelings are very suspect in terms of evidence quality. So remember, they could be useful to try and get some better quality evidence, so don't discount them entirely. We talked a little bit earlier about developing an incident timeline. Now, incident timeline can be very useful, as I said earlier, in actually starting your RCA. An incident timeline will normally give you lots of action causes and specific times and dates that things happened. That gives you a straight line on your chart to start building your cause and effect relationships, whether you're using 5 whys, Apollo methods, whatever type of method you're using. So a timeline can give you a good starting point to understand the actions that occurred leading up to the incident. Then you can look for the other conditions that existed at the time those actions were performed. So it gives you a good starting point, and it is very useful in incident investigation. So this will be something that you'll be doing after all your evidence gatherings happened. You've sorted out the good quality evidence, you build your timeline, and then you're ready to sit down and start conducting your root cause analysis investigation. Here's just one example on the screen at the moment of a particular timeline of events. And you can use sticky notes to stick them on the wall or a poster somewhere, so you can start to build up this timeline of events. You can use different colours for different sources of information. So you may have blue ones for things that came from precise data locations. You can have different ones for witness testimony kind of information. So different pieces of paper with different colours that give you a quick visual indication of where the evidence came from for each of these particular incidents on the timeline. So that's developing a timeline to help you get underway in your investigation. So just to summarise what we've been through today, we started discussing the security of the incident scene. So the initial person in charge manages the scene upon the occurrence, so somebody's prepared to go and deal with the scene and make sure it's safe. Selecting the team, so the relevant roles that you need to fill, and depending on the complexity of the incident would drive you to determine how many people you require. We then moved on to talk about planning the investigation, so getting the what, the when, the where and the significance in the initial stages, understanding the sensitivities, etc., and escalating any relevant notifications when necessary. Collect all the facts supported by evidence, so be prepared, have your go bag ready to go at any event, at any time of day, and attend the scene as soon as you possibly can, so you can start collecting all the data that you need. And then establishing a timeline so you can recreate the sequence of events that led up to the incident, and this helps you by using the interview statements that you've got and any recorded measurements. You can start to piece together the causes that led up to the incident, and helps you to understand the conditions that existed around the time those incidents occurred. So that's the things that we've really covered today, and having followed those 5 steps, you're then well placed to progress to the next 5 steps, which we discovered in last year's webinar, so the RCA process and the solution generation, etc. So we determine the root causes of the incident, identify and recommend any solutions to prevent similar incidents occurring, then get them implemented and track their effectiveness. And communicate the findings throughout your organisation so other people learn from your hard work and your investigation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stephen. That was so informative on a subject that really is so important to get it right. So thank you. We've had lots and lots of questions, and we'll try and get through as many of them as we can. If we haven't got time to answer them on the webinar live, we will make sure that we will send and answer them all individually by email. So please don't worry if we can't get through to you now. So I'm going to start the questions. One from Zoe Hawkins. How much can CCTV help towards accident investigation? Please, Steve?
Yes, CCTV can be very useful as it would be a direct video recording of an incident location. So it's sensed evidence. So it's really very good quality evidence, and the cameras tend to not lie. So it can support witness testimonies, and you can use it to help if there are any conflict in witness statements that you get from other individuals. You can use CCTV to help clarify what those conflicts are and resolve them. So it's very, very useful, and would be one of the top sources of evidence during an investigation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Zoe. Tom Began, why are the 5 whys not sufficient to establish the cause? And I'm going to ask this to Stephen, if that's okay.
Sure, okay. Yeah, great question. I think one we get asked quite a lot. So 5 whys is a great methodology to use, as I'm sure many of us know. 5 whys can be used on something that's a little bit more linear, a bit more of a straightforward type event that has occurred. Whereas if you go into something that's a bit more meaningful, where it's a lot more of a dynamic investigation, that's where a methodology such as Apollo, root cause analysis, more comes into play. You can start any investigation with a 5 why, and then if you find that that's not suitable, you can expand that out to being something more meaningful, let's say like an Apollo. But now 5 whys is certainly good. It can get you to some of the root causes and understand some of the solutions, but it very much varies on the severity of the initial issue.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Stephen. David Moorhead, do you need to be qualified to carry out an incident investigation? Steve?
This is one of the points that we covered earlier in the presentation. I think I don't see that we need to be qualified to be able to lead an investigation. We certainly need to have some level of training that provides us with the knowledge and expertise to be able to effectively conduct our roles. So I don't think qualification is a prerequisite, but certainly some level of training in understanding what it is we need to do to be effective. Definitely. So good question.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve. Mabruk asked, how would you determine the size of the investigating team and the depth and breadth of the investigation? Stephen, if that's okay for you?
Yeah, another great question. Thanks. Keep them coming in. Yeah, it's based on trigger points, I think. So normally what we've found is with certain organisations, and we touched on this a bit during the presentation, that if it's a not such a severe, depending on the impact, whether that's a cost impact, a health and safety impact, maybe it's reputational, environmental. You can have various triggers within your organisation that would determine the level of investigation that you undertook. So as we touched on, there was a number of different roles that should be played within the investigation team. And I think the more severe, the higher impact that the issue was, then probably you need more people to give the correct level of coverage, the appropriate amount of coverage from within the team, so that people aren't too spread or conflicted when they're undertaking those various tasks.
Fantastic. Thank you, Stephen. And Brian McGonigal, is there any value in investigating near misses? How should they be dealt with, and what constitutes a near miss? And that's a good question, because I actually would like to know the answer to that myself.
Yeah, it certainly is, and we mentioned near misses earlier as well. And near misses tend to be those things that don't get as reported as well as actual incidents. But it's important that we try and instill a culture of reporting for near misses, because we need to learn from them. Those near misses can become incidents later if they happen again. So it's important that we try and prevent recurrence of near misses. Just as important is preventing recurrence of an actual incident. So near misses tend to be things that have happened, or incidents where there's been no direct injury or effect on the business. So something that could have the potential to cause harm or losses of some sort. So that's how I would categorise what a near miss is, and it's vitally important that we record them and try and learn from them to prevent the realisation of the hazard becoming a loss. They need to be up there with the same kind of triggers that you would use, but rather than the actual losses, we need to discuss what the potential losses could have been, and understanding the causes of those near misses to prevent recurrence. So definitely important to investigate them as well.
Fantastic, that's great. Thank you so much. That's been very useful. Wayne Schofield, hi Wayne, how are you? His question is, at what point and by whom would the accident scene be at a point where production could start back up, providing staff in the area are willing to carry on?
I think it's important to certainly look at the need for operations, but safety has to be paramount. So securing the scene first after the incident, but understanding the need for safety is the first thing to really tick off. We need to make sure that if we are going to return to operations, then staff coming on scene are safe to do so. So it's important that if we do need to return to normal operation, that we don't lose the evidence, and we need as much information as possible from the scene before we allow it to change. So this is different for every organisation and every type of industry and every type of incident. So it's important that the people that are responding, that IPIC, that initial person in charge, can see what the impact is and can make an informed decision on the need to return to normal operations. So again, depends on the organisation, depends on the severity of the incident, but safety would be paramount in every case.
Yeah, plus I think as well is that we talked a little bit earlier about business continuity. So if there is, critical production operations that could be impacted by an issue or an incident, that should somewhat have been planned for. Obviously, we try and get a zero failure culture in any organisation, zero incident culture, but there's always going to be some issues or incidents that are unavoidable, and maybe sometimes that if there is a serious enough incident, there maybe should be some consideration within your business processes, your operating processes, to somewhat mitigate that and understand if there can be a secondary route to continue production while a particular line is down, or if there's an area of a plant that may be impacted, or an office that you can't get access to during an investigation. So one of the things to consider when you think about the whole incident investigation and RCA process.
Fantastic. I hope that answered your question. Hassan, can more than one role be assigned for investigation team?
Certainly, yes. I think we discussed this, that there are 5 key roles that we need to include, including a lead person, the person that gathers evidence, the person responsible for preserving the evidence, etc. Those are the key roles. But again, it depends on the significance and severity of the incident, the complexity of the incident, how much evidence there is required to be gathered. You may need separate individuals to be able to conduct each of those roles effectively. So it depends on the incident again. If it's something that's less of an impact, one person could do the whole job, but then you could have the requirement to have a communications coordinator. So if it's a corporate level thing and you've got media interest, you're going to need somebody that's specifically responsible for handling communication. So there's lots of different variances in between. You could have 2 or 3 people, but generally, it depends on the incident again, and the complexity of it.
And I guess you'd want to have some backup, again, in terms of business continuity, so you don't want to just be reliant on one person for a site that could take on all those roles. You need to have a couple of people just to sanity check each other, plus people go on vacation, plus we have different shift patterns, as we talked about earlier, where you might need to cover if an incident happened overnight, the first responders might need to be different, if that was an incident or issue that happened during the day. So all things to be considered when you're setting up your investigation team and processes.
Fantastic, thank you so much. David Sherrington, do you have any tips on accident investigation with a remote workforce, which is actually a really good question, mainly service engineers or delivery people, but obviously it's a key issue for us, I think.
It is. No, great question, because lots of people are remote working, home working. Like you say, for this question, you've got people who are remote field engineers. So absolutely, I think there are things that need to be considered. An amount of the investigation and evidence gathering, if you've got remote teams, can be set up centrally, but run with remote people. That is something that you can do. Obviously, the ideal is to have everybody in a room and to undertake any investigations locally and together. If you have got remote teams, then obviously consider that when you're setting up your teams, when you put your processes in place as to understand how anything would happen. There might be a level of testing, for example, if there's an issue or an incident with a remote person, there's been an accident, there might be drug or alcohol testing that needs to be undertaken within a period of time. That might be a mandatory process your organisation has, and you might have centres in different parts of the country where your teams are based that can do that for you. You can contract a third-party company to do that kind of thing. So yeah, it's maybe not a comprehensive answer, but yeah, the process should be adapted such that it applies to your operation, your working environment, and if a number of your people are remote, then you absolutely got to make allowances for that when you're going through this process.
Fantastic, really good question, thank you. And we've got time for one more, but as I say, please, if you have submitted a question that we haven't had time for, we will endeavour to get back to you. The last question that we've got time for is from Julian Penny. Can you confirm the issues around legal privilege and whether any internal investigation could potentially compromise subsequent civil or possibly criminal proceedings?
Right, sure. Another great question. Thank you. Yeah, of course. I think depending on, again, it's a trigger, it's a severity-based issue, that if it's something that would involve the HSE, for example, potential litigation to get anyone subsequently involved from a legal perspective, then you may need to have additional third-party people to come in and undertake any investigations. If it's something significant enough that there may be some legislative issue that comes as a result, then through the HSE or through somebody else, then I think they're the first people to be calling, and they would come in and run their own investigations. You can have some level of investigation yourself that you would undertake, but I think, yeah, it's a great question that if it's something so severe, if we're talking to serious incidents, we've recently had a facility that had a fire where insurance companies got involved. You can have fatalities where obviously you've got to involve the correct authorities. So yeah, you've got to be careful that you don't overstep the mark and take on more than you should when it's something so severe that really should be investigated by the proper authority. So yeah, great question and something you need to be very mindful of.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, and thank you everybody for listening. I hope it's been a worthwhile hour spent. Please look out for our next webinar, which we're having on Safely Differently. And if you want any more information on our mental health and wellbeing module, please contact us and we'll send out some more information. Look forward to seeing you all soon somewhere, I hope, and take care. Drive safely in the